Hello, new interns. We are back, and today we have Claire Kennedy with us. I won't say too much, but she is a marketing intern who worked for Autodesk. But more on that, she'll give us the answers, everything, what she did, and kind of what kind of a role that was, and what kind of a company that is. But for now, I want to ask Claire, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Just getting ready to go back to school, finishing up summer.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I wish I was on the UC schedule because right now I'm in my third week. It's terrible. But anyways, I I want to get started with kind of the first question about your education, and that is kind of what school do you go to or have you went to, and what's your major, and when are you gonna graduate?
Yeah, so for the last 2 years, have gone to Santa Clara University, where I was a psych major. And right before transferring, I was switching into being a marketing major. So had I stayed there, I would have been a marketing major. But now I'm transferring to UCSB, and they only have econ as their only business major. So I decided to stick with psych, and I'm going to be a psychology and brain sciences major there.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, and your expected graduation date is somewhere in 2024, correct?
Yeah.
Very cool. So moving on to kind of the internship that you just finished up, if I know that correctly, can you tell us, pretty briefly, not yet like super in depth, but what was your title and who were you working for and kind of what did you do?
Yeah, my title is kind of long. I was a brand strategy and campaign operations intern.
Okay.
And I was working for obviously the brand strategy and campaign operations team. And I had a manager, Tammy Pineda, who was a really lovely manager, and she managed me and at the time two other people, but my last week one other person joined, so now she has three people on her team,
Okay.
and it was a really great experience.
Very nice. And Autodesk, I mean, it was a great experience. And what kind of, I'm somewhat familiar with what they do, but generally, are they kind of like a software company? What is
Yeah,
Autodesk?
basically it's a software company, and people tend to know AutoCAD more than Autodesk because that's their most popular software.
Okay.
But the way that I think is easiest to describe like what Autodesk does is basically like if you look around you, Autodesk software was probably used in creating that. So like your dorm room or windows, cars, planes, virtually almost anything, including movies, because they also have animation software. So pretty like big budget movies that are animated, like Avatar, that used Autodesk Maya software.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. And so, when you were getting this job or applying for it, did you apply on a job site or did you have maybe a referral from a friend or were you reached out to by Autodesk? How did you kind of come into this position?
It was both. Um, we had a family friend who already worked there on the marketing team, and she ended up being my manager's manager. Um,
Oh,
so she gave me a referral and kind of helped me through the process. And I still had to apply, obviously. I think I applied directly through their like career website, and I had an interview with her and then an interview with my to be manager Tammy. And I think it was just those two, I believe. But yeah, definitely networking is key and things like that.
oh, for sure. Yeah. And you mentioned there were two interviews. Could you kind of, if you were to guesstimate from the moment you kind of sent in your application to, the day that you were accepted, they told you you've got the position. How long do you think that kind of took in time wise? And then what was the onboarding process like? Or was it just the two interviews?
That's a great question. I wish I had better recollection of like the specific timeline, but I do remember that there was kind of talks of, not to be confusing, but Tamara was the woman who referenced me, and then Tammy was my manager.
Okay.
But when Tamara was saying, "Oh, we might have a position for interns, like you should apply here and stuff," and then I applied, and I'm pretty sure that it took a really long time until I did the interviews, or it was like not that much time until I did the interviews, but a long time after before it was like confirmed that I got it. But I
Sure.
definitely recall it was enough time that I was starting to get kind of worried and be like, oh, I should be applying for other things. Like summer's
Whoa.
kind of coming up and they haven't like officially confirmed this. But then they did, obviously.
Yeah.
But it was definitely like a little, felt like I needed to have a safety net there just in case because it felt like they kind of took a minute to make it official.
Okay. So probably at least a month. Um,
Yeah, I'd say more like a month and a half, maybe even two.
got it. Got it. But you got the position, and that's the great part. um, were the interviews all Zoom or all phone
They
interviews?
were both Zoom. Yeah. And
Got
it
it.
was, hmm?
And it was with two managers, right? A hiring manager and then kind of a more senior level manager that you knew.
Yeah. Yeah. So my interview with Tamara was fairly informal and pretty short, as I recall. I'd say they were honestly both pretty informal. I mean, obviously, like I was nervous. I prepared for it a lot and definitely like used some of like those key talking points of like, why do you want this job? And like, how do you think you're a good fit, etc. But I felt definitely like my interview with Tammy was more like, do you want this position and like do you think it's right for you, not as much like do we think you're right for us, I'd say.
Oh,
So
okay.
thankfully beforehand, under my mom's advice, I had done like at least 2 hours of research into like what Autodesk does and had like a huge note page of like their different softwares and like what they do and like their past marketing campaigns and just like all of that. And I don't know if it actually ended up being like that relevant, but definitely was like really helpful to A, give me like a sense of kind of security if they ask me something like I know the answer. But B, it was definitely relevant, especially for a company like Autodesk that has, I think three different types of software to just at least generally know like what the different types are, what their industry is, like do a good amount of research into the company.
Well, and on that same topic about, your own personal research into the company and your own experience, I'm curious to know what you think is the reason, what you think got you hired essentially from the perspective of the hiring managers. What do you think they saw in you? Was it more like they were very focused on your experience, or was it your personality had a large part to play in the interviews? How do you feel you were kind of evaluated for the role?
Um, to be super frank and honest, I think that the fact that I had a referral played a really like large part in it. But also on top of that, I'd say the second biggest factor in my eyes at least was being so prepared. So like when, Tammy was like, do you kind of understand what Autodesk is and like does? And I could
Yeah.
give her like an in-depth explanation of everything I know and show like, I've really done my research, I've prepared for this interview, like I care about this role. Um, and I'd say that my experience before was I had done one internship that was for a nonprofit and it was online for a couple months. And that was a marketing internship, but it definitely was not as like involved as this one in any way. I was like the only person doing marketing. They didn't keep very good contact with me. I think it no, it definitely ended up ending because they just like, kind of stopped emailing me and like asking me to do things. There was no like start date, end date. It was pretty unorganized actually. So that was like my only experience before that. And I explained like in marketing. And I explained that, I had some experience and like that was a really great like intro to marketing, but what I was really looking for was like more mentorship and like a view into corporate marketing because that was a nonprofit and it was pretty small too. And I
Mhm.
had also done one legal internship for Kirkland and Ellis for like 3 weeks, but that's not super related.
What was that an internship for? I didn't catch that.
It was a legal internship for Kirkland and Ellis.
Nice. Okay. Well, you definitely came into the Autodesk position with experiences. There's definitely a lot of people who, need their first internship and they have none. So that's pretty cool. Now, moving kind of into what you did, what the position was like, and what you did in that role. Were you, well, first of all, how was this a full-time or a part-time gig? And then were you working kind of with other interns in a cohort or more under and with a like manager?
It was full time, so around 40 hours a week. And it was definitely like under my manager. I know that there was a few groups of interns who like had done projects together and stuff, and that was kind of a possibility because Autodesk had a lot of interns, like well over 100, maybe two or
Wow.
three.
Okay.
So depending on what like section of the company you're in and what you're doing, maybe that's more possible. But it was technically an online internship. I went into the office virtually every single day and lived in San Francisco, so I could do that. But
Wow.
I really didn't work with any other interns. I got to meet some other interns, but only because I like kind of aggressively like went out of my way to meet other interns and like socialize and try and reach out to people. But it definitely was just like me under my manager and then my team of, for most of the summer, just two other people.
Cool. And when you said you went into the office virtually every day, did you mean virtually, like through
Like
Zoom?
practically every day. Yeah.
That's what I thought you meant, but just in
Yeah.
case. Um, okay. And would you characterize your position as being more, was it more of a kind of support role or more of a project oriented role or kind of a mix of both?
It was a really nice blend of both. So I had my main like intern project for the summer, which I didn't end up starting until about 3 weeks in because the person that I would be working with it on for all summer, Vanessa, had been on vacation when I first started. So it was a nice blend of doing a lot of like operations work for the other person on our team, Leia, who only does like operations, not a lot of marketing. So I'd have I think twice weekly meetings with her, and she would every meeting try and show me something new. So like something useful, like a new software, a way to do something, like a way to organize. She was a very, very organized person. And then she'd give me like some little like operations assignments, like can you fix this website? Can you like send out this email or like write up these communications? And my main project was creating a campaign process model for a brand to demand campaign. So essentially, there was already a process model, which is basically just all the steps that you go through to create a campaign. And they had one for just like a brand level campaign, i.e., like only to put the brand name out there. And brand to demand is the brand team partnering with an industry team. So, like I'd mentioned, there's like three different, I think just three different industries. So, the animation, construction, and architecture and engineering design. So, while I was there, they had partnered with the construction team and done a like brand construction campaign. So I was creating a process model to kind of model that style of campaign of a brand team partnering with the industry team and doing like full funnel beginning to end, and incorporating like all the steps of both teams being involved together. And that took pretty much all summer,
Mhm.
which it was a great experience. And I think my favorite thing about it was that I felt like I was being like really helpful. Like I never felt like I was just doing like menial, like useless work, or they were just kind of giving me busy work or things to do. Like I know that the model I made and the PowerPoint that I made with it is going to be used like in the next campaign and is probably going to be really helpful.
That's awesome. That's really cool to hear. And I'm gonna pick this apart, your larger project. Thank you for sharing also your other duties that you did. But I want to really try, I feel like I understand it, but I could understand it more. So you were creating, it's called a campaign process model. You refer to it also as just a process model, is what I'm sure most people mention it as. And you said it was for brand to demand. Was that also something you mentioned?
Mm-hmm.
That's that's just the lingo for what you're doing, right? Like, okay.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned there were two teams working on this. There was the construction side of Autodesk, and then someone else. Who was all? Was it the architecture side also
No,
working
it's
on
just the brand team.
the brand team?
So
Okay.
the whole campaign was for Autodesk Construction Cloud, and it launched, I'd say about 4 weeks ago, I think. So like you can look up the commercials for it and stuff. And it was all for a construction product that the construction team was marketing. And then we came in, the brand team, to put a brand layer on it because essentially what the brand team is working on is the fact that when I'm like, oh, I'm interning at Autodesk, and people are like, oh, what is that? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm doing. Or when people are like, oh, AutoCAD, and it's like, yeah, that's kind of the issue here.
So it is okay. Great. It's brand awareness, and that
Yeah.
takes a lot of work. And if you don't mind, I'd love to know. So now I feel like I understand the project. What were some of the more you could, if you could name one or two, one would be fine. Like, what was something that you did specifically, either like a single thing you did or multiple, an accumulation of certain things that you're most proud of within that campaign? Like, for instance, was there like a lot of writing involved, or was there a lot of like idea generation that you were having to do, or was there um, creating models? I don't even know what that means, but creating models within like some software. Kind of where were you placed?
So for the CPM or like campaign process model that I had made, you could envision it as like the way I ended up making it was a flow chart with like beginning to end, and I think it was 6 columns and like each step. So I mapped that out in a software called Mural. I don't know if you know it.
No.
Um, so I mapped that out in Mural and just kind of made it look nice, aesthetically pleasing, all of that. And like obviously included all the steps. So it was like step one, like whatever, make a creative brief for the campaign, or like have X, Y, and Z meeting, and then there'd be some outcomes. So it's like the outcome of this step is that we have 50% of the creative brief done and like finish the strategy brief and things like that. And there was, I would guesstimate about like 35 like steps, each with their own like 2 to 3 outcomes to it.
Oh my God,
Um,
it's a
yeah,
lot.
and I wish I had it because I don't think I can pull it up on my computer because I had my own work computer that I had to send back.
Oh,
Um, but I made that, and that was probably like one of the things I'm most proud of because it was just like one cohesive, like, here's what I did, just could be fit in like a single picture. And then going along with it was also a PowerPoint deck. That's what everyone calls them, as I learned, is like PowerPoint presentations or decks.
oh, got it.
But a PowerPoint deck of kind of a fill in the blank almost of make a campaign. So the first couple of slides were like, list out here like who's on the core team and like what their positions are, who's responsible for X, Y, and Z, and who needs to be accountable for this and that, et cetera, et cetera. And basically just like really key information all able to be compiled in one place so that people can reference it throughout the campaign if need be. So I'd say like those two things together created like my intern project, but that's definitely what I'd say I'm the most proud of.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to that, that sounds, first of all, when you were talking about it, and then you said there's like around, oh, like 35 steps. I'm like, what? That's an enormous project. That's seriously cool. And I think you explained it well. Um, there's no way, you mentioned you can't pull it up. Is there any way that I could get a hold of it later, or is it's privately used, probably, right?
Great question. I can just shoot an email to my manager and ask. And if she says that it's not like a big deal or whatever, I can definitely send it over to you because it's hard to explain. It's definitely easier to show so you can like visualize it.
Yeah,
But if she says it's fine, then I can definitely share it with you.
cool. Yeah, no, let's give it a shot. But even if not, I think you did explain it pretty well for like being a complicated project. Now, I want to move on to just kind of your final thoughts on this internship. And I want to ask you, what is the most valuable, in your opinion, the most valuable thing that you've learned during your time at Autodesk?
Definitely, there's like two or three things, like big takeaways from this summer. I'd say the first is that like networking is so key. In my first 2 weeks, I talked to I think everyone on the larger brand strategy campaign team, which my team under Tammy was I think just three of us and Tammy, and then
Okay.
that was all part of a larger team that was around like I think about 18, maybe a little more people. So I talked to essentially everyone on that team for just like 30 minutes, had a little like one on one, like, what do you do? Tell me more about it. And the, starting off that, I started networking more when I just had like free time or like nothing to do. I'd reach out to people in the company and be like, oh, like your job looks interesting. Like, hey, do you have 30 minutes to just like chat with me? And
Uh,
no one ever said no. People were like so nice about it, always said yes, and really gave great advice, most of which was also like networking is key. Um,
uh,
and during the summer, I realized that I think that I want to do something a little more geared towards sustainability. So I reached out to some people on the what they call the impact team, which is essentially sustainability. And I reached out to some people who had marketing roles within that team and talked to them. And like one woman who also was the last person I talked to, I was telling her about like my interests and like I kind of like creative work, marketing, and like psychology and business. And she was like, oh, I have this friend who I got my MBA with who started this sustainable program. Like, I'll reach out to her, I'll have her talk to you, like, send me your
wow.
resume. And like, people are just so willing to be like helpful. So, definitely networking is key. But the other thing I learned from talking to so many people, because I think I talked to probably around like 30 people in the company for like over the course of the summer, but like a good amount of people. And I'd always ask them, like, can you kind of give me your career path, life story from like starting with college and what your major was till now? And what was
Uh,
so funny is I did not meet one single person, and they were essentially all like marketing roles. And I did not meet one person who was like, oh, I was a marketing major in college, and then I graduated and I got this like marketing job and da 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 da, and now I'm here. It was always like, I met one person who was like almost going to be a marine biologist, met a guy who was getting his master's in like political science at Stanford, and like so many like a private chef, like so many different life paths, essentially none of which were just like straight shot. I did this and then I like became a marketing role.
right.
And but that was honestly like really reassuring because I feel like in high school you're kind of taught like you have to know exactly what you want to do when you're like 16 and then just like follow that path. And if you don't get these internships, if you don't do like X, Y, and Z, like you're not going to make it. You're not going to get this good job. And like, I was really lucky to have this internship. But at the
Uh,
same time, I was really surprised at how many people are like, oh, yeah, like I didn't do internships in college. Like, my family couldn't afford to like fly me out to like live somewhere and do one. Or like, I didn't have that opportunity or like one reason or another. But it was really interesting to just see like you can take any path in life and still end up where you want to be.
Yeah, and that's something. Thanks for sharing that. That's definitely something that I wish more people like realized was the reality of people finding jobs. It's that there's all these zigzag paths, and it's very rare that you have the straight shots because I know probably a lot of us, including myself, maybe you have as well, but there's that certain anxiety about, oh, how am I going to get the next job right out of and perfectly with my degree. It never usually works out that way, and that's really cool, man. That was a lot of variety of people's initial jobs: a private chef,
Right?
political.
No, it was crazy. I was
Yeah.
like, how, and like, I think one person, yeah, on my team had been a bartender for like maybe 5, 8 years or like was in the service industry. And
Wow.
she went to, I want to say Chico State, maybe, which
Okay.
like, she got a degree. It was like a good school, but definitely not like a top school by any means, like not to offend anyone, but
Of course. Yeah.
definitely like you'd kind of I feel like you're taught like, oh, if you don't go to like whatever top degree school, like Ivy League or like a well thought of school, and like you have to be a business major. And it's like the amount of people who just had like the randomest paths in life and were like, yeah, and then somehow I just took like a left turn and came here and like now work at a really successful tech company in San Francisco, which I feel like is what the goal of people who kind of feel like you need to have the business major and like get all these internships is.
I I literally could not agree with you more. Thanks for mentioning all of that. And you know what? Pretty much what you just did, actually, you answered kind of two questions. I was going to ask you briefly, if you have any advice for people who are applying to similar roles or internships in general. But all of that was advice. If you had any specific or very, very brief advice that you would give to other people who are searching for roles like yours, I'd love to hear it. But if you don't,
Yeah. No, I'd just say like I know I said it like 80 times about networking, but
uh,
I'd say that like when I was kind of looking for roles, I would just go on like LinkedIn, Indeed, Handshake, all those things, and just kind of like send them my resume, like fill out the form, and like, I've applied. But now I think if I were to do it all again, I would narrow it down to maybe like 5 to 7 internships that like I'm passionate about and like really think that I would enjoy and like align with my interests. And
yeah,
then not only apply, but then reach out to basically anyone you can find and just say like, hey, do you have like 30 minutes to talk to me? And you'd be like shocked how many people are so willing. I also feel like people really like to give advice and just like talk about themselves, frankly, but they have like great advice to give. So
yeah,
I'd say just like reaching out to people and saying, hey, like, do you have 30 minutes for me? Or if you have any like family friends or anyone just reaching out to them and saying, like, hey, like, do you know anyone who might be looking for an internship position? Or especially if they work for a smaller company or like have a higher role in a company, like they could probably open one too or create one.
yeah. I mean, so being willing to, actually send out, taking the risk and trying to talk to them and sending out the email. I totally understand. So that was fantastic advice. Thank you, Claire. So, we're going to wrap up the interview. I loved your answers. And if anyone's interested in reaching out to Claire, we will leave her LinkedIn link somewhere below. And any other links that she is willing to share, we will also include those. So, yeah, please, reach out to Claire. I'm sure she would be happy to answer any questions or connect. And with that, I also want to say thank you to Claire. Thank you, Claire, for coming here and giving your advice and sharing your experience. I really enjoyed it. Um, so yeah, take
Yeah,
care.
thank you.